2024 was a year of disappointments. And I honestly don't think that I have experienced that much disappointment in a lot of cinema in a very long time. Welcome to Tea and Popcorn, where we talk about movies. If you are new around here, hi, my name is Megan. I'm a content creator who has been reviewing movies for nearly a decade. I have a degree in digital communications where I focus on film production. So I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. Past couple years, I've been doing a disappointment list on my TikTok and Instagram. All the movies that made me feel a little bit disappointed. Now, I'm not saying these films are bad, I'm just disappointed. However, this is actually the first year where I found that the most disappointing film to me is also the worst film of the year. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. The first film to disappoint me this year was Civil War. Now, the reason why this film disappointed me initially is because it felt like it was doing so much and trying to say something without saying anything at all. The film talks about the ethics of war photography, which I found was really interesting, but the film didn't really give the subject a nuanced perspective. Overall, the story felt muddled to me, but what stood out the most was the amazing performances. Of course, Kirsten Dunst gives an amazing, chilling performance, but also Kaylee Spaney. I mentioned in my top movies of 2023 video that I really enjoyed Kaylee Spaney's performance in Priscilla, and she gives equally an amazing performance in Civil War. Honestly, the performances really do carry the film. And like I said in the beginning, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad movie. It was just disappointing because I just felt it to be very mid. But what it is, it's like not terribly bad. And it felt a little bit more chilling upon my second viewing. So I think this movie might grow on me. Kinds of Kindness. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. Kinds of Kindness really wrote the back off of Poor Things. The thing about Yorgos Lanthimos as a director is he makes very bizarre films, to say the least. If you've seen Killing of the Sacred Deer, you know what I'm talking about. Poor Things was actually what introduced a lot of people to Yorgos Lanthimos. For me, it was The Lobster and also, I believe, The Favorite. Okay, my face is really shiny. Let me go back. I like dewy, I don't like greasy. But anyway, what I was saying, Yorgos Lanthimos. So I kind of went into the film not knowing what to expect. Is it going to be the Yorgos Lanthimos films like The Favorite and Poor Things, or is it going to be more of a Killing of the Sacred Deer or Lobster type of movie? Now, the reason why this one was, I guess, disappointing in a sense that it was 3 movies in one. And why I kind of put it as a disappointment is because I felt like some of the storylines could have just been their own movie. I felt some stories were a little bit more fascinating than others. My favorite stories of those were the first one and the second one. The third one, which all the promotional material with Emma Stone dancing, that one was the most disappointing to me. Now, I would have loved it, but there's a scene with SA in it that I just found that was very gratuitous, at least in its depiction of SA, for my personal taste and comfort. Of course, the cast is extremely stacked, which is why I was very excited for it, but I can't really picture myself going out of my way to rewatch it for anything other than the first and second part. But again, this movie might grow on me eventually. However, I think the film did do a decent job wrapping all the stories together. Next up, I'm going to talk about Drive-Away Dolls. I was really excited about Drive-Away Dolls because of Ethan Coen, who's of course one of the Coen brothers. This is also a sapphic crime comedy, which I'm like, okay, this should be a very fun movie. Also, we have a stacked cast too. I mean, we have Margaret Qualley, have Coleman Domingo. I was like, I'm sad. My biggest problem with this movie, even though it's only an hour and 24 minutes, that it dragged on and on and on. I don't know how this movie with such a fun plot was just so boring to me. It seemed like there was a lot of filler, which I think this film would have been better as a short film. A 20-minute film, maybe even a 30-minute film. This would have been so brilliant. So I would say great concept, but bad format. Next up on the disappointment list, Megalopolis. Okay, So Megalopolis, I've had really complicated feelings about this movie. Would I say I was super excited for it? As a cinephile, yeah, I was pretty excited for it. It's Francis Ford Coppola's film that he's been wanting to make for 40 years. Me personally, I have kind of a complicated feeling about Francis Ford Coppola, and I'm saying that like I know him. I don't. I think I know the only reason why I feel that way is because one of my film professors from back in the day was basically glazing Francis Ford Coppola, bringing him up on conversations that weren't even relevant to him. My professor literally wrote a book about Francis Ford Coppola. Every time I hear about that man, I kind of think, oh my gosh, kind of triggers me a bit. But I digress. Back to Megalopolis. The thing about Megalopolis that I felt a little bit conflicted by was, of course, the press leading up to it. And honestly, I wasn't going to watch this movie this year. I was actually going to save it for my 2024 catch-up series. But then I was like, hey, why not? I was also curious about the now get back to the club scene with Adam Driver.
Go back to the club.
This film was met with a lot of controversies even before it came out, with some lawsuits. Francis Ford Coppola talking about he wants to intentionally add canceled people. I'm not going to get into that for this. I'm just going to objectively review this movie. And honestly, it wasn't as terrible as I thought it was going to be. The thing about Megalopolis, so many studios did not want to pick it up, which is why it's 40 years in the making. And I don't mean to sound like a hater, but I could kind of understand why. It really feels like there's a lot of ideas in one that weren't really fleshed out. And I honestly think a producer should have come in and narrowed down some of the themes because it was a lot going on. This movie felt like a Stefan sketch. Like, this movie has everything: politics, Roman mythology, incest, and it's like 2.5 hours. I do like the cinematography though. The cinematography was really good. The way that some of the actors were directed, like I'll give an example. Aubrey Plaza, she gives this over the top performance, and I'm pretty sure that's just how she was directed because she is capable of doing a very subdued, dramatic performance. I could think about her performance in White Lotus. You know what I kind of thought about while watching this film is that this movie actually should have come out earlier. If you look at older movies, some actors were really overacting, and it actually kind of works with the charm of the movie because it does involve like technology and it is a sci-fi movie. It probably wouldn't have looked as good as it does today. I feel really weird about calling this a bad movie, but overall, for my opinions, I'm glad Francis Ford Coppola made this movie and he was able to put this out in the world finally after all these years, because putting out movies is really hard. And he also dedicated the film to his wife who passed away recently, and I think that's really sweet. Now, about Y2K. So I actually learned about Y2K pretty late. I actually found out about it probably in November or so. I loved the movie posters. I loved the concepts of what if Y2K actually did happen. Plus, it's an A24 film. I hate to say it, but it is not a great comedy. It is so unfunny. And I don't mind raunchy humor whatsoever. And I really wish that the raunchy comedy genre would really come back. I mean, granted, we had Bottoms last year, which was so great. So I was expecting something on the similar line of that. My biggest problem with Y2K is that, not to give too many spoilers away, and this is kind of a mild spoiler, but this is a spoiler that could make or break you wanting to watch this movie. So the movie actually introduces very interesting characters, or at least interesting character dynamics and potential storylines leading up to the point of Y2K happening. When Y2K actually does happen, those characters are killed off, leaving all of the boring characters to be the main characters. I'm not joining the Rachel Zegler hate train. This has nothing to do with her. Her character is extremely boring. There are two characters that are basically the same people that are left in this group, which made this film an unbearable watch. Fred Durst does save the movie, but that only happens at the end. Alicia Silverstone is there, but She doesn't do much. The biggest pro that I hear a lot of people talk about regarding this movie is, oh my gosh, it is so nostalgic. They really got down the cultural references and everything from the era. And I have to agree with them on that, but it only carries the film so much. Going into the next film. Now, this film I've been waiting for the past, I would say, 2 years. Maxine. I loved X and I loved Pearl. There is something about not only the movies themselves and the story and the performances, but the actual production behind it, with the films being released within months from each other. That is so impressive. So needless to say that I was excited for Maxine to come out, because there's just so much that you can do with Maxine. But Maxine is the weakest film of the X franchise. And at first I thought the reason for that was the bigger production, because X and Pearl have a small production. They are essentially shot in one location or only a few locations. There is an ensemble cast for the first one, and both movies are very character driven. Maxine takes place in Hollywood in 1985, in the middle of the Night Stalker murders, as well as a satanic panic, and all those tie into each other, which I found was a very interesting concept. By looking at the trailer, it was similar to Giallo films where there's a red herring, so I kind of expected that there to be a twist of some sort. But this wasn't really a great Giallo inspired film, in my opinion. I'm glad that Ty West was playing around with that genre, especially since he takes inspiration from other horror movie genres or other film genres. For instance, Texas Chainsaw Massacre for X, and even though this is not a horror film, but The Wizard of Oz and old Hollywood films for Pearl. So it only makes sense that he taps into the Giallo genre. I think he should have tapped into maybe an 80s slasher movie genre. I think that would have been really fun, especially because that will help utilize the cast more. But instead we get a mystery, and the mystery is not all fascinating. Interesting characters get killed off way too fast. I'm not gonna reveal the twist, but the twist I didn't really care for. And also, I thought about this as I was preparing for this review, that I think what made X so successful and Pearl so successful is not only the sets and everything, but the fact that the characters are written so well. This is gonna be a bit of a hot take. Maybe Maxine is only a great final girl, but not a great character. Hear me out, hear me out, hear me out. The reason why I say that is because Maxine's story is interesting, but is she an interesting character? Obviously, Mia Goth gave a really great performance as Maxine in X. And I would argue she gives a really good performance as Maxine and Maxine. But it seems like for Maxine, her character is really one note. And I think what made her character at least relatively interesting in X is because she was able to bounce off of the other characters within the ensemble cast, especially her co-stars within the world of the film, because it was just very fascinating. And with all that being said, she was actually the perfect final girl, because let's be honest, the final girls tend to be the most perfect ones. Maxine had a very great backstory, and her backstory does go into Maxine, but I feel like she needed to have more of a personality, or at least more characters that she could play with. Because I think the biggest problem with this film is, or at least as far as the storyline goes, they tried to do with Maxine like they did with Pearl, a very much Maxine story. Even though Maxine has her great iconic moments, she is not really quite a big standout character as Pearl was. Because Pearl, she was a delusional queen, and we love that for her. Maxine, more grounded in reality. However, she becomes very murderous randomly, but also at the same time, she's haunted by the events of X. It's very muddled. Anyway, I was hoping that they would end on a bang, but they really didn't. One positive that I do have, which I thought was really nice, is that the film starts with a Betty Davis quote and ends with the song Betty Davis Eyes, which I thought was chef's kiss. This is the first year of my series where actually the most disappointing film, in my opinion, was also the worst film, in my opinion. But you will have to wait for my worst video. I'm gonna grab a cup of tea and we're gonna go right back into it.